Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Jillian. So, this whole thing with pain, oh my God, it is so spiritual. It is like seriously spiritual. Um, it this kind of brings everything back full circle to all the different religions out there. But I remember all the suffering that I went through in my whole life, and it made me so strong. What pissed me off about my childhood was the fact that I didn't understand it. And then in my adulthood, when I developed the jelly juice mentality, my mom wouldn't understand where I was coming from. She wouldn't understand. But she raised me in the Jewish religion, and the Jewish religion is about suffering. They understood suffering. I mean, the book of Exodus spoke to that. And then Buddhism can be attached to all the different religions. And a lot of Jewish people do tend to gear towards Buddhism because it is about suffering. It's understanding suffering. But where they came up short was the fact that they never learned from the suffering. Morning, John. And I remember suffering so much and being so poor, not putting myself in the medical system all the time, which I did in the beginning when I thought I was having issues, but I didn't have enough money to stay in it. So when I had certain issues go on, I did go to the hospital for an antibiotic reaction. But even since then, even when I went to the hospital or to the doctors or the Kaiser for my PMDD, they wanted to put me on drugs and I wasn't going to be zombified. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to suffer through this PMDD. I'm just going to suffer through it and just deal with it. And so I dealt with the suffering of trying to get a bunch of jobs, and my resume was like 3 pages long, and the suffering of people looking down on me, the suffering of going into new groups and families and people don't understand me because I'm really fucking different. And I know that. I suffered from going from one state to another and dealing with people and me not understanding them and them not understanding me and trying to fit into a society that doesn't want to suffer, doesn't want to learn new lessons. And I'm learning lessons not to be a drug addict, not to be an alcoholic, not to be whatever. And I would look around me and learn from my community and learn from my own mistakes. But I and so the suffering that a person goes through, and that's the whole point of the MK Ultra. Now I understand MK Ultra. Not everybody survives MK Ultra, okay? But MK Ultra is about suffering. And if you survive MK Ultra, yeah, if you live to tell about it, that's great. But what did you learn from it? And so usually people who undergo extreme suffering don't understand. Sometimes it's personally inflicted, like it's intentionally inflicted to get something out of you. But what did you learn as a person from it? And that's every individual person's, journey is how do they learn from the suffering of that was intentionally done to them, the suffering that was self-inflicted, the suffering of their families or friends, their society. And so when you're dying and reproducing and you're taking remedies and things to cure you, you don't learn. But then how? But even if you, what is there to learn when you go through that suffering? People don't know. That's the issue. And so now, eventually, at some point, we're at a tipping point. All of humanity is suffering, like they all are, because no one's learning from their mistakes. Antibiotics can only go so far until the body says, okay, I want to live, and it'll be antibiotic resistance, and you will continue to suffer until you figure out you have to feed the pain. You have to feel it. You have to feed it. You have to feel it. You have to deal with it. And so the whole Jelly Juice protocol is about dealing with suffering and pain of your genetic line that never understood that they, every time they take a remedy or take an organ out or go to the medical holistic, they never learn their lesson. And so the kids are then left with going through the same suffering. That's what predispositions are, is the fact that the genetic line never learned how to never revisit that again. And so why people die is because they never learned how to deal with pain and suffering and to feed it, to stay alive indefinitely. And if you choose to have a baby, that's great, but teach that child that you're going to have to deal with the evolution of suffering in your childhood. Now, how much is all relative to, the community at the time, and that the person is supposed to live through the suffering, not die from it. And that those are the mistakes that were made in human experimentation, that people did not survive the suffering of learning, of evolving. And yeah, a lot of experiments were very deadly because of the that people didn't that the scientists didn't understand when to stop. Okay. And this is way beyond me as far as what the government does with their experiments. But I know in my lifetime, in my little lifetime, that the JJ protocol, going through what I went through, and I'm sure all of you going with what you're going through, this is going to be a lesson never to revisit where you came from again. Okay? As soon as you turn to a pill, a powder, a supplement, a detox, or any kind of remedy, you're depriving yourself of learning the lessons of the past. Okay? And right now we have 7 billion people who don't understand their suffering, don't know how to deal with it and survive it indefinitely. And so they'll suffer for a certain amount of time, be in a cured state, not learning any lessons, then procreate. The child doesn't learn any lessons either. They make the same mistakes, if not worse, because no one is holding them accountable, not even Mother Nature, until death is the only option. And death is a consequence for not learning your lessons. But you're like, well, how do you then have a nation if people weren't reproducing? Well, if people weren't reproducing and they weren't dying, you would have a set population. Every single physical feeling that I feel, I know is from a variant because somebody is mutating it and they're on their way out the door. I mean, I felt like I smelled onions last night. It was really uncanny. And I did go through heat, sweating. My dog was running freaking in circles. She did a little bit last night. My husband's home right now. And she did a few circles last night downstairs. I'm like, Jesus, sugar. And then she finally just relaxed. But this virus is letting us know how much suffering is in humanity. Because if humanity was not at a deficit, you wouldn't have such strong viruses. The reason why this virus is so strong because the amount of deficits 7 billion people hold and they're releasing, and you have to deal with human. We're all connected. We're all connected. And so when people want to just turn a blind eye, they go take their remedies, they go take their pills, they get lost in distraction, they take out organs, and they still go on their merry way doing whatever, still inflicting destruction to their brethren, and they don't care, and whatever, and they have a baby, and the baby does the same thing, in their adulthood. And so that's the suffering of humanity, because no one's learning the lessons. The parents aren't teaching the kid the lesson, because the parent has never learned the lesson from their grandparents, and so on and so on and so on and so on, until you can trace all the way back to the original genetic line. And so why birth is so painful? Why birth is so painful? Because it reminds you, you shouldn't have to rebirth your genetic line. You should be the genetic line. Now, if somebody is 100% on the life trajectory and they choose to have a baby, yeah, you can extract eggs, put that egg in, and or take a sperm from somebody else who's living indefinitely, produce a baby that person has to carry to term. They're going to feel the pain of evolution. That's the morning pains. That's all the different symptoms of evolution, is all the pain during childbirth and during the gestation period. You got to feed that other life. And then when that life comes to be, you got to feel the pain. That's why that's why the hospitals are around, to use those shots in the back to help with the labor pains and stuff. But using all that stuff doesn't remind humanity that the reason why you're giving birth is because you and your genetic line never learned the lessons of the past. That's what's so crazy about all of this, is I understand now what pain is. is more than just, okay, it's an evolution. Oh, it's more than that. Pain is a lesson to let you know never to revisit what you did again, and to teach your kids this, so they don't have to be going through the suffering and then die from the suffering. I mean, there's suffering. You can live from the suffering, you can die from the suffering. But everyone in our world is dying from the suffering, so they're not learning their lesson. And so it's not about being in a cured state indefinitely in this dynamic world. It's suffering with everybody else until the last person learns their lesson. And so we're going to be in this, this transition from the old world to the new world is going to be full of suffering. And you're going to see it. You're going to feel it. If you don't feel the suffering, then you're disconnected from humans. I feel the suffering every single time I feel a new viral variant. I'm like, oh gosh. When I hear a siren, I'm like, oh gosh. Somebody's dying and somebody's reproducing. It's pretty uncanny. And so when I woke up this morning, I was just, I definitely had to do a major poop. Oh my God, after that viral variant ran through my system, after dealing with my dog and her skin inflammation and her itchy, like my head was itchy. Like every single time I get a new virus that just floats through. It wasn't even like I went to Walmart or anything else. It was just, I went outside because it was cold, right? I went outside and it was cold, and I came back in, and I'm not saying I felt something immediately, but the cold does bring in viruses because, people are coughing, their body's going through a breakdown. Cold does that. It was below 32 degrees at night. People are outside even below 32 degrees, so they're releasing a lot of DNA and they're dying. And that's why when you go into a crowd of people who are at different levels of de-evolution, you're going to feel the evolution in yourself. Someone's dying in that crowd because you're affected. When everyone's in a cured state, no one is passing along anything that's going to cause you to upgrade because they're not releasing something. You see what I'm saying? And so this is very spiritual. This is more than physical. This is spiritual. And when I can call out Buddhism, that, yeah, you get half the point. Yeah, suffering, suffering is great. Not really, but suffering is supposed to teach you a lesson. But the whole reincarnation is saying that, yeah, well, you'll learn something in the future life. No, sorry, the Dalai Lama, all the new Buddhist monks, the Dalai Lama, they haven't learned anything. They're all suffering, starving themselves in their vegetarian gardens out there praying to whatever, and they're dying and doing the same thing. Oh, they're looping. They call it's supposed to happen endlessly. No, it's not. At some point, it has to stop. But if you want to build nations, then nations are built on suffering. Nations are built on wars. Nations are built on dying and reproducing. Okay, now that we have 7 billion people, now we have to figure out how do you keep a certain amount of people balanced, not always dying and reproducing, and then experience the deterioration of the genetic line, of which you've seen, all of you have seen, that offspring are not always up to par to their parents. If anything, sometimes the offspring are worse than the parents. Why is that? Because no one learned their lesson in that genetic line. And so the habits become astronomical, and even more so, that are destructive. And so that's why there's this virus. Man is his only enemy, really. How man deals with this virus is his enemy. How man deals with their symptoms make them their own enemy. And so if you are using the holistic allopathic world to stop your suffering, to stop your symptoms, you will not learn any lessons of this life. Okay? That's no doubt about it. The fact that I finally got off all the remedies, I got off even the J juice, because I don't want to be cured in the JJ mentality. I want to feel every single suffering out there, because it's a lesson to me never to revisit what that other person is doing to themselves. Whether it's alcohol, drugs, massive amount of sex, just, doing things that give you a 50% chance of living, like jumping out of airplanes and climbing rocks and that are like thousands and thousands of feet up in the air with nothing to hold you up, or even if you had something to hold you up. Would I risk my life doing that? I don't. I want to learn from my people around me. I don't want to make the same mistakes. And that's what I vowed to myself even like 20, 30 years ago. I will never make the same mistake as my parents. I will never make the same mistake as my sisters. I will never make the same mistake as those out there that are fucking up. I will never make those mistakes. And I can still be happy. I don't have to go and do what people are doing today and say that that's living life. Living life is learning from your mistakes, cultivating the brain, and giving people the opportunity to get on a different trajectory. But you can't force it. Okay? You can only drop information and give them a third option, despite if they have to do one option or the other based upon public health and government mandates. That you can still survive despite what is going on. I mean, you can't survive a nuclear war. I mean, if China decides to lob a big old nuclear missile right here in Ohio, I'm not going to survive that. Okay, so I'm not saying that you're going to be immune to world wars and activity like that. But I mean, a vaccine is nothing. Going into a public place really is nothing. But are you prepared to suffer from the people around you? Like my dream, this I wrote last night when I was talking about something last night. I forget what it was. But my takeaway was the fact that at some point I want to be able to be in a society where I can hang out with other people and not feel their suffering. At some point I want to live in a society where I don't have to worry about having to wear a gun or have a gun in my house and feel in fear of someone trying to rape me, kidnap me, or whatever, because someone's at a deficit. At some point, I want to live in a world where I don't have to feel other people's deficits, that they're up to par 100%. I don't feel the wailing of the suffering, of the deficiencies, of the starvation. That's the world I want to live in, where I don't have to see that or hear it or feel it. But when you get sick or when you're evolving, it's because somebody else is suffering. That's what it is. And when you are wailing and you are upset and angry or sad or even happy, you're suffering. It's not about being happy, sad, glad, or mad or anything. It's about just being even. I talked to Bridget the other day and she said, she doesn't feel the extreme fluctuations of emotions. She just feels even. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Me too. I put my boundaries down. I got mad when I felt like I was being converted into Jehovah's Witness, and I was really mad at myself that I acted the same way. And so, yeah, you can have those when you realize you've made a mistake, when you realize that you've contributed to the suffering of humanity. And so, yeah, you're supposed to get mad at yourself, not at other people. It's not that person's fault who they are. You can't change them. But you can get mad at yourself for contributing to the destruction of humanity and the destruction of people around you by trying to convert them instead of giving them the option. And so, yeah, I don't have these extreme emotions. I mean, if someone wants to come at me with all their BS through email, I just block and delete unless there's something I need to learn from that email or something I need to clarify on Facebook so people understand. Being called a hypocrite is not a pejorative thing. It means that you understand both sides, but you also want to give people a choice in the matter that they can survive whatever side they stand on or whatever side they're forced to be on because of government mandates or public health reasons. And so I want to be even. And that's really what the absence of suffering is that you're not living from your emotions of feeling like someone's out to get you. I had to go through that whole emotion of someone's out to get me for a long ass time because I didn't know my own strength. I didn't know my own protection of my community and the people that are in it. I just, that comes from a deficit. When you feel like someone's out to get you, whoever it is, whether it's the government or another faction or an interest group that is opposite of yours, that the paranoia if something's out to get you means you're coming from a deficit because you're still suffering, haven't learned from the past, and your genetics have not learned from the past. And that's the issue really, is we have 7 billion people who are procreating, never learning from the past. And so suffering will continue until that genetic line is completely destroyed. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It is what it is. You have the choice now. Before you didn't. All you had was a choice between the holistic and the allopathic, and then being distracted in alcohol, drugs, and sex until you're out the door. And you've never learned anything except to numb yourself to the suffering of yourself and of humanity. And then, yeah, your kids are not going to learn anything. Neither will you, because you're dead. You don't learn anything when you're dead. Your kids won't learn anything when they're dead. They'll just learn how to be inebriated or numb, because you've taught them to be inebriated or numb. And so I'm very connected with the world because I can feel it through my symptoms. When people are not dying and reproducing, they won't be passing around a virus, because they'll be so strong that even a tiny little virus, you have to fluctuate and adapt to your environment, but the aggressive symptoms wouldn't be. The reason why people are suffering aggressive symptoms, because that virus is telling you how strong the suffering is in humanity. Because a weak virus, you would barely feel it. Before COVID-19, you hardly felt anything if you were relatively healthy. It's when the virus points out how exponential the suffering in humanity is, because it's trying to upgrade people who are resisting the upgrade. And so that energy is causing them to suffer and release pixels of themselves, of which other people are picking up and feeling the anxiety. When I went to Walmart a few weeks ago, I felt angry. I felt anxiety, because I'm picking up viruses that are giving me snapshot of people's emotions. And so I don't want to feel suffering in humanity. So I choose not to go and hang out with large groups of people. I'll go shopping. I'll feel the suffering in humanity when I go shopping for food. I'll feel the suffering of humanity when I go outside and the wind is carrying the snapshots of pixels of the people who are coughing in the wind, who are also suffering on their way out the door. But will I purposely put myself in a situation where I'm taking part in the suffering of humanity? No. I will use Facebook to give people opportunity to end their suffering, but in a way where they have to face it. And then their body, mind, and spirit will vow they will never go down that same road again of taking pills, powder supplements, detoxes, remedies, herbs, extracts, being lost in antibiotics, lost in distraction, not wanting to face the pain, the greed, the gluttony, all the 7 deadly sins. People finally realize that they don't have to be numb, that they can face it, and they can still survive it. That's the whole point of the JJ mentality, is you can face the pain and the suffering and you can still survive it. But those that don't understand that, they will go get thyroids taken out. They will go get things taken out, because they don't want to ever learn the pain and the suffering of their choices of, not only themselves, but then their prior genetic history or their predecessors. Right now, you all are being punished for your predecessors' behavior. And some of you will not learn the lessons. You will still be an activist against whatever. You will still think there's an enemy, and you will be the enemy to somebody else, and then somebody else will be an enemy to you. You will never learn how to deal with and face the pain head on, because you're so used to taking all of your remedies, your elderberry syrup, all that shit that's out there that doesn't allow you to learn the lessons of your genetic line. And so, you can be upset at the government. You can be upset at Bill Gates. You can be upset at whatever. But you still haven't learned your lesson. They're going to deal with their own stuff. Bill Gates will be subject to his own karma, so to speak, I guess. Everyone out there who's dying and reproducing will be subject to their own karma, because they never bothered to learn the lessons of what it means to suffer and not ever go there again. And when you are dying and reproducing children, it means you haven't learned the lessons. And so now, if you're on the JJ mentality and you have kids, now you're going to have to give them the example. What they do with their own life is up to them. But at least you can live the example. But it's hard to take somebody that came from major predispositions, and they're older, And you're trying to teach them now that, okay, you got to deal with the pain. You got to feed it food. And the person is resisting. You can't make them do anything. As soon as a kid gets a certain age, you can't make them do shit. So I understand that. But at least, if anything, be the example. Okay? But this is very spiritual, even more than physical. Physical is whatever. Spiritual, yes. We're all connected. All of our genetic, we came from the 7 original pantheon. We're all connected. As much as you want to be disconnected, doesn't mean you have to partake in the destruction of humanity and have to always take on the suffering of others. No. You'll feel it residually as you go move around in societies because you want to get things. I see your sugar. Hold on a second. Jay, are you dressed? All right. Well, I'm going to go because I got to take my dog out or she pees on the rug and my husband's not dressed, so he's not going to go out there naked. So anyways, this should be a lesson to you guys that you got to deal with the pain and suffering. You got to deal with it. And you got to feed it all food in the food supply. You got to just give yourself the time to relax, the time to rest, and stop chasing money like it's water, because money is not everything, especially if you're suffering. And so you do what you need to do to get by. But the more you chase something that doesn't give you return on your body, mind, and spirit, just material shit, the more you're going to suffer because you haven't learned. It's more than the material world, you guys. There's a lot more to this life than what you have been presented in your short little lifespan. And you haven't learned from your predecessors if you are still thinking there's an enemy, because you are your worst enemy. Okay? The virus and the government isn't doing shit to you. It's you that has not figured out how to face your pain and suffering because you're always wanting to be numb and drugged out with herbs, extracts, and all the natural and holistic and allopathic remedies. And that's your own undoing. That's not the government, and that's not the other person who is vaxxed or unvaxxed. It's your ass. All right, bye.